All right, good evening and welcome to another episode of American Cultural Shifts. My guest this evening is Dr. Ryan Gassin. Ryan and I have been colleagues for, I don't know, the better part of what, Ryan, maybe 6, 7 years, is that right? We've
Yeah,
known each
yeah,
other.
I'd say
Um,
so.
and Ryan has a unique perspective. He is a leader in the Church of Jesus Christ with Latter-day Saints, and he's going to tell us just a little bit more about his position, and then we're gonna kind of get into some of the topics this evening. So, Ryan, just tell us a little bit about you and your responsibilities and leadership positions within the church.
Sure. Thank you. It's great to see you, and thanks for having me. Um, so I have been a member of the church for most of my life. Uh, my parents joined the church when I was a child, and that's probably maybe a story for another day. We may or may not get into that, but my dad converted from Judaism, and my mom was a non-denominational Christian. But ever since I was in diapers, essentially, have participated and in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Some of your listeners may be more familiar with it as Mormons or the Mormon Church, but it is the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
Okay.
And as far as my leadership positions, it's a lay church, a lay clergy, so those who essentially everyone serves in different positions, whether it's a Sunday school teacher or working with the youth or the children or the adults. And through the years, I've served in most positions that a member can serve in at the local level, including I did serve while I was there in Springfield. Uh, Served as a bishop for a couple of years, and currently here in the Northwest Arkansas area, I serve on what is called the High Council, which is essentially a group of, again, uh, members who volunteer. We all have various different professions, but volunteer time and energy to help strengthen the church, serve the members and the community here.
Very good. And so you've been a part of the church your really your entire life. Are there as you've gone through these different lay positions, Ryan? Is has there been things that have changed over time for you culturally that you see affecting the members of your church?
I would say that probably some cultural changes that affect membership of our church, as well as maybe members of faiths in general, other faiths, other religions. One change is certainly technology. Um, there are blessings and benefits of the growth and improvements of technology. There are also some drawbacks. I think one positive change as a result of this cultural adoption and implementation of technology, one positive change I've seen is the availability 24/7, anytime, anywhere, access to scriptures, to scripture study tools, to sermons,
Mm-hmm.
and an essentially limitless number of resources to help deepen understanding and religious study. That's certainly not unique to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, but I think that probably affects has affected religion in a positive way. In addition, I guess another positive benefit would be um, some who are searching for truth or faith are able to maybe more easily find it thanks to technology or social media, social networks, and
Hmm.
messaging across the internet. then on the flip side, as I said, I've seen some what I would what I would say are some negative cultural shifts or detrimental cultural shifts as a result of technology and influencing, in the aspect of religion. One is just isolation. I think interacting online, and then maybe even a step further through social media. I wonder if some of those interactions some are certainly real, but some are virtual and maybe exclusively virtual, where it's not a real interaction. It's just I'm posting something to the cloud, to cyberspace, and someone else is seeing that, but we're not actually interacting together.
Yeah, it's interesting you'd say that because, Ryan, I read this one time that, one on one or in person, we talk to other people.
Mm-hmm.
But on social media, one to hundreds or thousands, we talk about ourselves.
Yeah.
And that is sort of isolating in and of
Mm-hmm.
itself. There's a lot of, I think people call it virtue signaling on social media. Look at the things that I'm doing, or look at the things that I'm writing or saying that make me the person that I want you to think that I am. Or sometimes it's just outright bragging, look at my new whatever car,
Yeah.
uh, whatever.
Right.
But social media does have this sort of kickback, and that is that I have also read that the more friends, and I'm using the air quotes here, the more friends you have, the more lonely you tend to be. Those
Mm-hmm.
relationships are not always as robust and what do you want to say, meaningful, I guess, as the
Mm-hmm.
ones we have in person. At least
For
I
sure.
feel that way.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that is, I perceive that to be true in my own life, in my own interactions, and it seems that the social science, uh,
Bears that
studies
out.
that yeah, bears that out. I think it has had an interesting, that dynamic has had an interesting influence on religion, um, people of faith. I'll say, in that it's sort of created a phenomenon of digital discipleship. Uh, so, whereas historically people enjoyed and needed, I think, to some degree, to go to church or many would go to church for strength, for support, for social interaction. Now that's all. I think there's a growing perception that everything I could possibly need is online. And and so we lose some of that reality. I think anyone who's watched a Major League Baseball game from home and has had the opportunity to attend a baseball game at a stadium knows that it's not the same thing. Um, the lights, the sounds, the smells, the fans,
Yeah.
being there is not the same as watching it on TV. And I would say that a lot of members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and I would venture to say probably every other major religion, um, there's been a cultural tendency to shift away from going to church. COVID certainly didn't help with that,
Right.
but I think there's a lot who wake up Sunday morning or Saturday morning and say, why go hear the sermon when I can get
Right.
the same sermon on YouTube?
As you say that, Ryan, I am thinking back to, when I grew up. I grew up in a small town in Nebraska, but our church was sort of our social hub, and by that what I mean is that most of the meaningful relationships that my family had were through the church. So went to the hospital and visited them when they were sick. We celebrated with them when they had successes and so forth. But I say that in this context. I heard a comedian one time say that, and I've had the exact same experience as he described. But a comedian said, when he was growing up, that if somebody rang the doorbell, they'd be like, "Oh, who is it? Let's go find out. Put on some coffee. This is great." And now when the doorbell rings, I don't know about you, but I think like, what is going on? Why are people here? What do they want? This is crazy, right?
Right.
And it's just this shift that has occurred over the course of my lifetime where sort of looking forward to social interaction has been replaced with this sort of suspicion, like, why in the world would these people be at my house?
Right.
There's all kinds of ways to contact me. Text, email, phone, video chat. Why would you physically come here? And I guess I'm saying that in the same breath as you described going to church. Like, why do I need to get in the car and get dressed up and shower and go and interact? I'll just get online.
Absolutely. And not only that, but sort of the irony, I think, is, someone might say or ask, why would I bother to go to church and sit next to my nosy, annoying neighbor with their crying toddler while the minister teaches about charity and love of neighbor and grace, when I can just listen to that at home in the in the comfort of my PJs and without having to worry or be annoyed by that nosy neighbor or the crying toddler. And it's just, especially in religion, I think it's just
So
it's
Ryan, what do you
unfortunate.
tell your members that sort of have that feeling? What is your response?
That's a great question. I guess I would say, essentially, well, first of all, everybody's situation is different, and that's an important aspect of religion that I think we'll maybe get to in some of these other questions and topics. But just the idea of love and being kind and compassionate, and so understanding why someone isn't coming to church is important. But assuming that their only reason is, well, I can get it on YouTube, I can get it on the Zoom stream. I think I would ask about experiences that they've had in person, and try to help them see and remember that while it is good to tune in to Zoom, it's better and best to be there, where as I'm learning from the minister or the preacher or pastor about charity and grace, and I look over at the family next to me on the pew or the family in front of me, and I actually have to put that in practice, and that, I think, is the purpose of religion. If it doesn't change me, if it doesn't teach me and sort of force me,
right, it's just sort of words.
Yeah. And so I think that's something along those lines is what I would share with those members who say, I don't need to go, I can just get it at home.
So maybe related to that question, Ryan, is what do you think, or what do you believe the role of religion is in a community or even in a society? What role does that fill uniquely?
Yeah, that's a great question. So as I was thinking about this, I tried to dig through some research and see what do researchers say, what do social commentators, social influencers say, specifically about religion, and what are my thoughts. And it was interesting to find that in one survey, a majority of millennials, anyway, 58% of the millennials agreed that religion is personal and should not play any significant role in society. and I think there are probably a lot beyond just millennials. Maybe that
I
a
feel that.
similar, similar statistic applies to other populations, the broader population. I disagree. I think um, religion in society plays a crucial role, and we see that maybe perhaps in the family and in fatherhood as much as anywhere. Um, there are, I think, social studies, scholarly studies uh, over years, over the decades that have looked at what is the role, what is the association of religion on families, on teens, on fathers. And it seems to me what I've seen in my life, just anecdotally, as well as what the researchers seem to have found, is that um, teens and men who participate in some religion, actively in some major world religion,
Hmm.
there's less crime, there's less drugs, they do better in school, they're more involved at home, they have better, more success professionally, um, and the list goes on and on. So I
Yeah.
think it's hard to argue with that. It's pretty compelling anyway, and that's just that aspect of society. The what's happening with our kids and their long-term outcomes, and families and fathers and those long-term outcomes. Um, and it was and that was applicable. It had bearing across different races and socioeconomic backgrounds.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah,
and then I think
I've read the
beyond, yeah,
same. I've read the same studies, Ryan, and you're right. I mean, it's hard to argue with the data on this. I mean, it's pretty clear that, um, and it's not that necessarily religion is the only thing that societies use to sort of convey these morals, these unwritten laws, whatever you want to call it, the stuff that kind of binds people together. But it's what we've had for 4,000 years, and this is kind of this moment in history, I would say is a pretty big experiment as to whether there is something besides religion that can replace what it has done, which is to, as you say, sort of bind people together in community. I mean, this has probably some very obvious political implications. I mean, one of the ways that nations bound themselves together, particularly after the 1600s and the Treaty of Westphalia, was okay. Well, we're France, we're going to be the Catholics.
mm-hmm.
We're Britain, and we're going to be the Anglicans, and I mean, this is how it all played out. But that was important in history because it sort of got a large group of people to say, okay, I may not know you, but I think we believe the same things, or I imagine that we believe the same things. And so
Yeah,
if there's a threat to you, it's a threat to me. And
mm-hmm.
we're going to be one on this.
Mm-hmm.
The United States clearly has benefited from this over the last 250 years. And yet that seems, Ryan, at least my impression is that those that's sort of fracturing, as you say. Religion is now a personal thing. It's not really a societal thing. People are, I'm sure you've read this, they're a lot less likely to go to church. They're a lot less likely to identify themselves as religious, although many people say they're still spiritual. So maybe that's the next question I have for you is what's the difference, Ryan? What's the difference between somebody who is spiritual or says, I am religious, but I don't necessarily practice a religion? Is there a difference between those two in your mind?
Yeah, that's another great question. Um, I think obviously people will define religion, religiosity, spirituality differently. I think, you know, is it possible to be an actively practicing member of a certain denomination and not be religious, yeah, I think that is possible, or not be spiritual. And by the same token, is it possible to not attend church at all and still be religious? Yeah, I also think so. Um, I think there's a difference between participation and progression. I think to maybe tying back to our previous question about digital discipleship and people at home tuning in. I think there's certainly plenty of people who maybe tune in or show up to church in person, but walk out the chapel doors or the synagogue doors, and they leave their religion there until they go back the following week or the following major holiday, and so yes, people can be religious and spiritual without going to church, without being a member of a church. But I think it's pretty hard, if not impossible, to do in isolation. I mean, we live as families, we live as friends, we live as coworkers and teammates, and that calls for, like you said, I think something to bind us, and we don't. Certainly, religion isn't the only thing that can bind us, but I'm not sure if there's anything better. It seems that history hasn't shown anything to be better than that. Um, and I guess maybe one scripture that a Bible verse in the New Testament came to my mind is from James, that pure religion is visiting the fatherless and the widows in their affliction. So and that can be, that's irrespective of what someone's religion is or what their faith is. I think, as far as I know, all the major world religions essentially teach love God and do good, love your neighbor. And so if there was someone who said, I don't need any church or anyone or anything to be religious and spiritual, I can be on my island or on my mountain or on my on my post by myself and be spiritual. I'd say there's a limit. There's pretty strong limits to that, because it really comes to, how do I interact and interface with others who, especially with those who don't think like me, or who don't share my beliefs.
Now that sort of opens up another issue that I think is important to talk about. So as much as religions tend to bind people together, Ryan, there's also this dualism in most religions. There is good and evil, light and dark. You know what I'm saying, and so that tends to split people. I mean, this has been it's been a huge problem throughout history. I mean, wars get started over this, right? There's an us and there's a them, and them is after us, and so we go to war, and 50 years later, a quarter of Europe is dead, and this is I mean, unfortunately, this is how history has played out. How do you see that paradox sort of playing out in your community? I mean, is there a downside to religious belief in that regard, in that we do create sort of us and them, the anointed, the not anointed, and so forth? Do you put any credence in that argument?
Well, I certainly think there's a downside to thinking to the us and them mindset, but I don't think that And while that certainly has been and is tied to religion, I don't think it has to be. I think religion, truly understood and truly lived, would destroy dualism. I don't think dualism, I don't think religion creates or causes dualism, at least in the sense of us and them. Um, I think misunderstanding religion, misapplying religion,
Mm-hmm.
that I think is what has led through the centuries and today to this us versus them mentality. I think boundary lines, whether it's between nations or states or communities or families or religions, boundary lines don't have to be battle lines. I think in perfect practice, the major world religions, Christianity, Islam, Judaism, Catholicism, Catholicism is Christianity, obviously, but the branches of Christianity, they all teach love God and do good, love your neighbor, and that may not be the exact verbiage depending on the tenets, but I think it's selfishness and pride that leads to this us versus them. And it is certainly unfortunate that mentality has maybe not just crept its way into religion, but has blasted and rammed its way, over the centuries and into, so that people of faith, religions, rather than loving one another and seeking the good of one another, just focus on, and instead of focusing on the similarities, they focus on the differences. So to do away with religion, I don't think would solve that. I don't think it would get rid of the us versus them. I think that is a normal, natural tendency of the natural person. Religion, I think, is the main cure,
right?
But it has to be religion understood and lived as it's intended.
Do you think, Ryan? So one of the things that you read that I have read about why religiousness continues to sort of shrink in the United States, as well as throughout much of the rest of the world. But it's that, all of these sort of phenomenon that go on around us that used to be inexplicable. Nobody understood for thousands of years why there was day and night, why the tides rose and receded, how life occurred, et cetera, et cetera. And certainly there are many questions that remain that are inexplicable. But you would also have to say that list is at least shorter than it was 500 years ago. And so as time has gone on, the argument goes, well, look, these big questions seem to be answered by science. I guess I don't have a better word than science, but science explains a lot of that. And so, well, what do I really need religion for to explain these things? I mean, did Noah and the ark, did that really happen, or was that more like Darwin's? Right? I mean, there's all of these sort of these things. What I'm wondering, Ryan, do you see that? Do you hear that in your own community? And I guess I'd put a big asterisk here, because I know that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is, despite what I just said about religiousness sort of shrinking around the world, your church has expanded, has grown over the last 30 years. And so maybe this is not a great question for you because your experience may be the opposite of what I just said. But have you heard that, or what do you have members of your church that talk about that, or does that creep into your own way of thinking from time to time?
Yeah, so I love this question. And if I can, let me circle back to the last one because I just realized, maybe I'm not being maybe I'm being too general and not as specific as you're hoping for, my experience or perceptions in the Church of Jesus
Yeah,
Christ of Latter-day Saints. So, as far as that, the dualism, us versus them in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, you're probably aware that um, in for members of the church I belong to, as well as others, but certainly including our church, um, there's there is tension between some members of the church and other members of the church who are, for example, LGBTQ, or
yeah,
people who are, LGBTQ who
yeah,
aren't members of the church. And and certainly some of your listeners, may have
yeah,
seen or experienced or be aware of that
yeah,
there's some us versus them. And I would say what I said generally applies to myself and to members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, that um, if there are members who persecute uh, or view us versus them mentality, have that mentality, I'd say that's just religion misunderstood or misapplied. Um, we're encouraged to love our neighbor, and um, unfortunately, that isn't always what happens,
yeah,
and it's including with the LGBTQ, and so I would say just we should follow Christ as our main example, who one of the most, I think, tender stories in the New Testament was when he was at a well with a woman by a well in Samaria, who she had, I think, been married 5 times or more and not married to the man she was currently living with. And my understanding from that account in the New Testament is that although Christ wasn't okay with her lifestyle, he was okay with her.
hmm,
And that's a fundamental difference. And I think that's hopefully what members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints would view, how they would, maybe view our friends and neighbors and coworkers of the LGBTQ community or other faiths, that, yeah, there may be some things we disagree on. Um, but just because I may not think this choice is okay, that doesn't mean that you're not okay. You know what I mean? And
yeah.
so anyway, I just thought I'd try to get a little more
Well,
specific
no,
for you.
I'm glad you brought that up, Ryan. I know that has been a big source of controversy
Mm-hmm.
in the church, and how to incorporate LGBTQ IA plus, right? I think
Yeah.
in the church, or not including them. Is there
Mm-hmm.
does that do those decisions, Ryan, in your church? Does that come on a local level, or is that something that is a decision that's made on an international level, and then people, the member churches abide by that, or how does that work?
So I guess, and I don't mean to make light of the question. It's an important and great question. I would say at the root of it, the decisions come from universally from God and from the recorded scriptures. We do have a prophet and a quorum of 12 apostles that lead the church
Hmm.
and that help provide direction and interpretation of scripture if there are
Hmm.
some areas that are ambiguous in important, or where misinterpretation could have really important ramifications. So there's a global level, but at the same time, it's also personal because the leaders, the prophet, the apostles, haven't changed their view from the time that Christ called his original apostles, or from the time of the restoration of the church in the 1800s, that loving our neighbor is the second great commandment, second only to loving God.
Mhm.
And so that hasn't changed, and it won't change. Um, there is direction um, provided, or it's reiterated and reinforced to the membership that we, regardless of race, religion, creed, sexuality, we're all brothers and sisters, and children of a loving Heavenly Father, and that's how we should see and treat everyone. Um, I don't know if that answers your question. At,
No.
at,
And I
at a,
mean, this has become, yeah, it's a complicated issue, not to gloss over it. I know a lot of people have struggled with this and making sure
yeah,
that trying to do the right thing,
yeah,
knowing that there have been cultural shifts in this regard. And I mean,
yeah,
we do have to, we have to get along with one another. We can't ostracize a group
right,
of people. We can't draw these boundaries and make them battle lines. I think you said earlier. I really like how
yeah.
you said that. So that's
And I think
what I'm going. Go ahead.
practically speaking, talking about marriage, uh, our belief and doctrine is that marriage between a man and a woman is ordained of God, and that's not going to change, regardless of social pressure. What's accepted or not accepted by society. That won't change. Um, and so while the church as a whole, or general, and the leaders of the church won't accept gay marriage um, as ordained of God or acceptable to God, it also won't change that that gay people, that are acceptable, not only accepted by God but loved by God. And so, yeah, anyone and everyone, we should respect all, love all, disrespect none. Um, and so, and I guess by the same token, I would say, thankfully, there are many um, who profess tolerance, who advocate tolerance, and who truly live that tolerance. Sadly, there are some, whether they're religious or non-religious or members of the LGBTQ plus, that advocate tolerance, but only uh, if it's their view.
Hmm.
And I'm not sure that unless tolerance is total, bidirectional, or multi-pan-directional, um, I think it's more tyranny than tolerance. It seems to me that Hitler was very tolerant of those who shared his same viewpoints and beliefs, but I'm not sure that was exactly tolerance. So it's an important. These are, I think, important issues, and people of faith and people not of faith. Um, I think there's a general misunderstanding of what tolerance is and means and what it looks like. And unfortunately, I think we talk about it much more than we actually live it.
Practice it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
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 So
I would agree with that. I think, um, there is there's a lot more words spoken about this than there are actions to back it up,
Yeah.
And that's what I think that gap is what we need to fill, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. So, so science and religion, I think that was your
Yeah,
question, right?
yeah,
Yeah. So
yeah,
I love this question because, I mean, you and I are both scientists. You more than myself. You have additional degrees that I don't. But through medical school, through residency, um, obviously we were exposed, and in our daily practice, we're exposed to science all the time. Um, and in my daily life, I expose myself to religion. I try to open the book and open my heart and mind to religion all the time. So I love this question. I think science versus religion is a false dichotomy. Um, I think there are many who would say science is atheistic, but I don't think science is atheistic. I think science is agnostic. Um, Certainly, there are scientists who are atheists, but there are plenty of accomplished and renowned scientists in history. Some of the famous historical scientists that we learn about in textbooks, in grade school, as well as contemporary scientists, are deeply religious. I think they're more like teammates, not opponents, but teammates on the same field, playing different positions, but on the same field, working towards the same goal of finding truth. And I think they're equipped to answer different questions. And certainly, like you said, more and more questions are being answered by science, and that's fantastic. Science is doing a better job as technology and information and knowledge increases. I think science will continue to be more and more capable of answering more and more of the questions that science is equipped or will be equipped to answer. I don't think, but I don't think, all right, I think there are questions, religious questions, that science just isn't and won't be positioned to answer. And I think that's okay. I think I would be, a religious person. So I guess specifically in my faith and in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, I think there are members. I see or hear of some members who increasingly doubt the need for religion
mm-hmm.
as the breadth and depth of scientific knowledge grows. And I think it's unfortunate. Obviously, I'm biased, but I think it's probably that's again more of a misunderstanding of the roles of science and religion in society. Sort of like a catcher and a pitcher. A catcher shouldn't try to pitch, and a pitcher shouldn't try to catch. They should play their position, and the best outcome will be when they both do what they do best. And it would, I think we would laugh at someone at church saying, well, I don't believe in science. I don't believe in gravity, or I don't believe in photosynthesis. Like, those aren't things that people do or don't believe in. They just,
Right.
They just are.
Right.
And science has the tools to measure those things. And at the same time, there are things that I think are very real that probably can't be measured and won't be measured. Like You know, momentum is a scientific principle, but also I know you played competitive basketball. Um, you know, probably anyone who's played or watched a game has experienced momentum in a game in a competition, and there's a shift in momentum, or there's growing momentum for the team or for the player. It's real, but it can't be measured.
Right.
And you know, or love, you know, the love I feel for my family or that you feel for yours,
Right.
um, the the feelings that you have for your patients as you help them get safely through surgery and back to functioning to what they want and love to do. You know, that's real, but
Yeah.
it can't be measured. And just because something can't be measured in a lab or in a, you know, observation room or through some experiment doesn't mean it's not real.
Yeah. No, I think that's well said, Ryan. I know I have struggled with this. I would guess, I would hope that a lot of thinking type people have spent time wondering about this. You know, it just strikes me as I get older that yes, the list of questions does shrink, I suppose, but I mean, it just means that new questions get written, you know? I mean,
Exactly.
just because you can, you know, you say, well, you know, we kind of understand gravity now and we know why there are gravitational fields and so forth and why the planets go around each other. Well, that doesn't tell you why there's a gravitational field,
Right.
right? And I suppose, you know, there's this age old question that I suppose a lot of, you know, academics for years sit around and stroke their beards and smoke their pipes and ask this question, you know, why is there something rather than nothing?
Mhm.
Right? I mean, nobody, that's sort of the penultimate question, I suppose.
Right.
But, you know, science doesn't, I think, purport to try and answer some of those things. It, and yet, uh, I mean, it almost, it, those kind of questions are so real and yet so difficult to get your mind around that it does strike me that there is a role, if you're open to it, of what role God plays in all this. And I'm not proposing that I understand it any more than anybody else does, but I will say, I do think that a mind that is open to that, to asking those kind of questions, um, I think I think that's a much better way to go through life, in my humble opinion.
I certainly agree. I think I certainly uh, don't claim to be by any stretch, you know, an expert scientist or an expert in the scientific method, but it seems to me uh, that for someone to claim that science, you know, has found no proof that there's a God, proves that there's no God, it is seems to me unscientific. I mean, you'd have to, in order to prove that something's not there, you have to be able to have proven that you've looked everywhere, and that's not possible.
Right.
You know what I
Right.
mean? So, like you said, it's science. Some questions science shouldn't purport to answer, and science should be okay with that. I think many scientists are.
You know, as you say that, Ryan, I'm thinking about it. I may have mentioned this before on a previous podcast, but I I got so emotionally engaged and angry, I guess is the right word. About a summer ago, I was out on the East Coast somewhere, and I saw this bumper sticker. I'm sure it's not just on the East Coast that they have these bumper stickers, but it said, "I believe in science."
Mhm.
And I thought, "Oh my God, you've got to be kidding me! Science is not a religion, nor is religion a science. I mean, Ryan, I mean, a true scientist who might be listening to this might listen to an anesthesiologist and a neurosurgeon and go, "Look, you guys aren't really scientists, so just
Right.
stop saying that." Okay, but I hope I can still make the point as a neurosurgeon with some credibility that look, science is always is it's never done. It's not like an article of faith. We keep testing it all the time. As soon as you say, well, this is how it works, then you're just sort of waiting for the next round of scientists to go, well, not quite.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there are exceptions to that. You mentioned this earlier. I mean, photosynthesis, it's a real thing. Gravity, it's a real thing. But 99% of science is always under trial because we're trying to prove that what we thought was right is not right. And that's how it works. So I like what you said about science being sort of agnostic. I mean, the science doesn't care, but when we treat science like a religion, I think that is just, it's just so wrong, because that's not what science has ever been about, is believing anything. Excuse me. But anyway, I'm sorry, I got on my soapbox there about that.
No, that's...
I really do feel strongly that science cannot be used or viewed in a similar light as religion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think as I said, I think they answer, they're two, perhaps the two key players in, or tools, in this game of life. And I think, thank goodness, thank heaven, thank God for science and the inspiration and wisdom that he has enlightened the minds of men and women through history to discover these theories, truths, tools that we can measure. And I think probably scientists would say, the more we learn that we don't know. The more questions we answer, the more questions we have, because now we can build bigger and better telescopes than we've ever had. And we realize there are stars and galaxies and solar systems that we never knew existed. And now we have new questions that, one, we don't even know how to answer yet.
Yeah.
We have to figure out how to build the tools to answer these questions about the ages of these systems and properties, measurable, physical, natural properties of these things, or the ocean, or species, whatever the field of science may be. I think it's probably just going to continue to, as questions are answered, more questions evolve.
Why would future generations, why would our generation be any different or treated any differently in the future than we treat the past? I mean, we look upon people like Copernicus and Galileo and think like, gosh, I can't believe these guys were persecuted for these, clearly, these beliefs that they were right about. Well, I mean, they're going to say the same things about us someday. Like, can you believe these people? They were so stupid. They didn't.
Of course.
I mean, that's how history. That's how it works. You get enlightened over time, but it doesn't happen all at once.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly right. I expect my grandkids won't believe that my kids and I actually had to hold phones to FaceTime, or that we actually had to drive cars, or that we had to, because that's the nature of it. And so scientists who dismiss religion, I feel sorry for them. Just as I feel sorry for people of faith, religious people who ignore science and dismiss it, because it is an important source of truth. What is happening in the world around me? How does it happen? Why does it happen? A lot of really important questions, thankfully, are answered by science, and really some really important questions are not answered by science, but I think are answered very, very well in very compelling and inspiring ways by religion. Yeah.
Well, very good, Ryan. This has been. I know we're getting kind of into more than an hour of this, but I think this has really been an interesting conversation. I mean, I really appreciate you coming on and talking about difficult things like this. I've said to other guests on this podcast that I mean, anytime you talk openly in the public about controversial things, it certainly doesn't make you more friends, right? I mean, it's not like talking about this stuff endears you to to more people. It does the
Yeah.
opposite, actually. It makes a lot of folks angry and so forth. And I guess I accept that, and I'm glad you're willing to also accept it, at least for an hour here. But no, I really, Ryan, I appreciate you being able, being willing to talk about this stuff. We don't have all the answers to these things, and these are issues that I'm sure we will be dealing with even years from now. But knowing that we're at least making some progress and we're able to have these conversations, to me that's really important, because in silence, just ignorance just festers and hatred festers, and I don't think that's healthy. I think when we get these issues out there, at least we're talking about them. We can hopefully make progress on them.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I appreciate the opportunity. It's been great to see you and connect with you. And I hope it's been helpful. And I'm sure, like you said, I'm sure I hope you have many listeners, and the more you have, the higher the chances that I've offended somebody.
That's right.
And certainly didn't want or mean to offend anyone, but I think these are, like you said, these are important conversations,
For
and
sure.
important to be able to learn to listen to others, including and perhaps especially those who think differently and have different ideas.
Yeah, I agree.
So,
Well, thank you, Ryan. I appreciate you spending some time with me.
thank you.
Okay.
Take care.
Good night.